A game object is any major or minor piece that makes up your game. In a way, every object in your game is a game object. However, some objects are pieces that make up other game objects. See the following example. Here I have a main camera, which is a game object. This main camera will allow my game to look at the game world from a viewpoint. My directional light controls how the lighting is distributed over the objects in my game. If I were to rotate this light, you could see that the lighting scenario becomes very different depending on the direction that I rotate this light. I also have a cube here. This cube is a game object. This sphere is a game object. This capsule is also a game object. I also have an empty game object, which is invisible by nature. I have an empty child to the game object. In order to create these game objects, you would go to Game Object, and then you could select Create Empty Child, any 3D object here that you want to create, along with some other options, interesting options, which we can explore in later tutorials. A 2D object, which is a sprite, a variety of different lights. If you're familiar with any other 3D software or game engines, you'll know what most of these lights do, but we'll go through that in a later tutorial. You could create an audio source or an audio refurb zone, and you can create UI elements. A particle system, or another camera. All of these are considered game objects within the Unity game engine. As I said, some objects are pieces that make up other game objects. These are called components. Essentially, game objects are containers that hold components. Game objects don't have any functionality on their own. Components give game objects their functionality. If we click on any of these game objects, you'll see that there are a variety of properties over here in the inspector. Each of these properties is a component. For example, this transform here is the transform component. Every game object in Unity must have a transform component. There's never a time when you could remove a transform component from a game object. The reason for this is that the transform component tells Unity where to place the object, what the rotation of the object is, and what the scale of the object is. Without such a component, a game object would cease to exist in the game world. You'll notice that even these empty, invisible game objects still have transform components with the position and rotation set to 0 and the scale all set to 1. In a future tutorial, we will look at how we can use these empty game objects to our advantage. If you take a look at any of these other objects, you'll notice a number of different components. For example, on this sphere, it has its transform component. Then it has the mesh filter component, where we see that a sphere is being displayed here. It also has a sphere collider on it, which will enable it to collide with other game objects. And then there are a bunch of smaller properties here that are a part of this component. For example, do we want this collider to trigger an event? What's the material attached to this particular collider? Where is the center of this collider, and what is the radius of this collider? You'll also notice here that we have a mesh renderer component controlling the visibility of our sphere. I can toggle this on and off, and you'll notice, if you look here, that my sphere appears and disappears. This green around it is the sphere collider that we currently have activated. We can also deactivate that and then toggle our object on and off. The default material is currently applied to our sphere. In future tutorials, I will show you how to change the materials on game objects to alter their look. In closing, basically game objects are any objects we want to interact in our game world, be they 3D or 2D. Components, such as the sphere collider, mesh renderer, mesh filter, and transform component, define what this sphere is and what it does. Without these components to guide the interaction of the game object in the game world, we wouldn't be able to create a game in a game engine like Unity, because these objects, although they may exist, wouldn't have any of the properties that allow them to be in the game world and interact within the game world.